They thought she was just a waitress, a worn-down woman in a forgotten roadside diner, tired hands, tired eyes, moving through the motions of a life that seemed small, insignificant. They laughed. They jeered. They thought she was easy to break. But the moment they crossed the line, the moment they mocked her scars, they had no idea who they were dealing with, because buried beneath that faded uniform and quiet voice was a soldier, a warrior who had walked through fire, who had seen things no man or woman should ever have to see. She bled. She survived. She carried brothers and sisters home under the black sky of war. She held the hands of the dying. She stood when others could not. And tonight, in this dusty little place, she would rise again, not with fists, not with anger, but with the quiet, unshakable strength of someone who has already seen the worst the world can offer and lived to tell the story. Asterisk. They thought she was just a waitress, just another tired face in a dusty roadside diner. Somewhere between nowhere and forgotten, she moved like someone who had been there forever, her apron worn thin, her hands lined with the quiet calluses of someone who served coffee and comfort in equal measure to most who passed through those doors. She was invisible, a ghost in her own story. They didn't ask her name. Didn't notice the way her fingers trembled slightly when she poured the coffee, didn't see the way her eyes scanned the room every few seconds. The way a soldier scans for exits without even thinking, because she was a soldier once. Long before the coffee and the crumbs and the cracked linoleum floor. But tonight wasn't supposed to be different. It was supposed to be just another night, another shift, another set of footprints on a floor that never seemed to stay clean. Till they came and the roar of the engines could be heard before the door even swung open, a deep guttural sound like thunder rolling over flat land, and then the door burst wide, the bell above it giving a half-hearted jingle as 4 men stepped inside. Leather jackets, heavy boots, eyes that carried too much liquor and too little kindness. They laughed. Too loud, moved too fast, took up space in a way that was meant to make others feel small, and for a moment the regulars froze. Fingers paused over cups and forks, a silent calculation passing through the room, but the waitress, she didn't flinch. Didn't show it, even though somewhere deep in her bones something old stirred. She greeted them with the same weary smile she gave everyone. Voice soft, steady, asked what they'd like. Took their order without missing a beat, but they weren't there for food, not really. They were there for the kind of power some men seek when they feel powerless inside. The kind they find in making others uncomfortable, in taking what isn't theirs to take one. Them a man with tattoos that crawled up his neck like angry vines watched her too closely, his eyes sharp in a way that made the air feel thinner, and when she returned with their drinks, he spoke loud enough for the whole place to hear. Nice arms, sweetheart. Bet you could wrestle me down, huh? The other men laughed, ugly, sharp laughter that filled the small space like smoke. But she just set the glasses down, her hands steady, her face unreadable. She been here before, not here in this diner, but here in this moment, faced with men who thought they held all the power because they spoke louder, because they laughed harder, because they didn't know her story, didn't know what those hands had done, didn't know where those feet had. Walked outside, the wind howled softly across the flat stretch of highway inside. Time stretched thin. Her breath moved in slow and steady, the way it had when she crouched behind the crumbling walls of villages, thousands of miles from this place, when she had to stay calm because fear made you sloppy, and sloppy got people killed. Even now, even here, the training never left, but they kept pushing another comment. Another shove of words meant to poke and prod, meant to make her flinch, and for a flicker of a second her eyes drifted to the scar that ran faintly along her forearm, the one she never spoke about. The one most people never noticed, but he noticed. The tattooed man, he caught that glance. And with a wicked grin he leaned forward. What's that then, battle wound, or bad boyfriend? More laughter, mean empty, but the question it lit. Something ancient, something buried. And in that split second, she wasn't standing in a diner anymore. She was standing in the dust and heat of a faraway land, the air thick with the smell of sand and smoke, the echoes of distant explosions, the cries that still visited her in sleep. Her fingers curled slightly against the tray she held. Her jaw tensed, but her voice stayed soft, steady, no shaking, no fear, because she had faced worse than this, faced worse and walked through it, faced worse and come home when others had, and set the tray down, looked him in the eye. And for the first time, something shifted, not in her, in him, a flicker of something, a hesitation. Because somewhere deep in the way she stood, the way she looked at him, without blinking, without breaking, there was something he couldn't place a weight, a knowing, a power he didn't understand. The diner held its breath, the wind outside whispered, and the first crack in their bravado had begun. For a moment, nothing moved. The biker's smirk faltered just slightly, a flicker of uncertainty beneath the bravado, because sometimes it's not the loudest person in the room who holds the power. Sometimes it's the one who doesn't flinch, the one who doesn't rise to the bait, the one who stands still while others shout the waitress her name, still unknown to the men who mocked her gently, gathered the empty tray and walked away without a word. Her steps were measured, controlled, not rushed, not shaken. She'd learned long ago how to move under pressure, how to breathe when the air was thick with danger, how to stay calm when every instinct screamed to run or fight. She disappeared. Behind the counter, poured another cup of coffee for an old man near the window, and for those few seconds, it was as if nothing had happened. As if the world had tilted and righted itself again, but the bikers weren't finished. One of them, a heavier man with a crooked grin and eyes that gleamed with something mean, slapped his palm against the table. The sharp crack made the silverware jump. "Hey, sweetheart, we're talking to you. You deaf or just dumb?" The others cackled, the sound too loud too. Sharp for the small space, but still she didn't react. Her heart steady, her hands steady, because fear was a choice she refused to make, because long ago, in another life beneath foreign skies, she had learned that the first person to lose control lost everything. She set the coffee pot down, her fingertips brushed the smooth metal, and somewhere inside her mind, the memory unspooled without permission. Afghanistan, the dry wind, the endless horizon of dust and rock, the weight of the rifle against her shoulder, the heaviness of the body armor, the sound of distant gunfire, the voice of her sergeant over the radio. "Keep your head clear, keep breathing, stay sharp, stay alive." The memory flickered, then faded, and she was back in the diner, back in the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the sharp scent of fryer grease. But the training, the instinct, it was still there, coiled beneath her skin like a quiet storm. She lifted her gaze, slowly met the biker's eyes, said in a voice calm enough to still the air, "Do you want another drink or not?" It wasn't what he expected. It wasn't fear, wasn't outrage, it was control. And for a second, just a second, he blinked like a man unsure of the ground beneath his feet. But pride can be a dangerous thing, and the leader, the one with the tattoos, leaned back in his chair and smiled, that thin, cold smile again. "Come on, boys, she's got a little fight in her. Bet she's fun when she's angry." And the laughter rolled against the other. Customers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, some looked away, because when ugliness shows its face too often, people shrink, hoping not to be seen, hoping not to be next. But there was one pair of eyes that didn't look away, a boy no older than 10, sitting in a corner booth with his mother, his small hands clutching a glass of water, his wide eyes fixed on the scene unfolding, and for the briefest of moments the waitress's gaze met his, out, and something passed between them, something ancient. Something quiet, a reminder that even in the smallest of places, even in moments that seem inconsequential, there is always someone watching, someone learning, someone who will remember. She straightened her spine, rolled her shoulders back, and without another word stepped toward the bikers, not aggressively, not fearfully, but with a calmness that unsettled them far more than any shouting ever could. The leader raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah. You gonna throw us out, sweetheart? You and what army on that?" Was the line, the moment, the words that cracked open the door to everything she had tried to keep buried. She exhaled slowly, her hands steady at her sides, her voice soft but unshakable. "You have no idea who you're talking to," and for the first time, the laughter died completely. The weight of her words, the steel hidden within them, hung in the air like a held breath. The wind outside pressed against the glass. The old bell above the door swayed gently, and the world for just a heartbeat went still. The man leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as if trying to read something written on her skin, some hidden meaning he couldn't quite grasp, and for the first time there was no laughter in the room. Only the soft whir of the ceiling fan, the quiet clink Of a spoon left abandoned in a saucer, the boy in the corner leaned forward to breath, held without even knowing why. You have no idea who you're talking to. Her words replayed in the minds of everyone present, but she didn't elaborate. Didn't. Razor voice didn't let anger sharpen her edges. She just stood calm, still, rooted like a mountain ant. It was that stillness that rattled them. The leader shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, trying to shake off whatever invisible thread had wrapped around the moment. Well, sweetheart, why don't you enlighten us then? Go ahead, tell us who you really are. But she said nothing. She didn't need to, because sometimes the truth speaks loudest in silence. One of the other bikers, younger, less sure of himself, shifted uneasily. His eyes darted to her hands, to the way they didn't shake, to the faint scar visible near her wrist, to the way her feet were planted, balanced like someone who knew how to stand when things went bad. Memory surfaced something he'd once seen on the news footage of soldiers in desert fatigues, the way they moved, the way they held themselves even when they weren't holding weapons, and for a second doubt flickered across his face. But the leader wasn't ready to let it go. Pride is a dangerous master. He slapped his palm against the table again, louder this time, and grinned. You're full of it, he said. Ain't no way. Look at you. You're just a waitress, nothing more. The words felt hollow, even as they left his mouth, because something in him, something primal, knew he was wrong. And she didn't argue, didn't defend. She reached for the coffee pot instead, lifted it with steady hands, poured quietly into their half-empty mugs without a word. And in that simple motion, the entire diner seemed to lean closer, as if waiting for something unseen to unfold. Her mind, though still, was far away now. It drifted back without her permission, back to the heat, the dust, the weight of the Kevlar vest pressing into her shoulders, the feel of sand gritting between her teeth, the sharp report of gunfire that once cracked the air like lightning. She remembered the sound of it, the smell of it, the way the ground shook beneath incoming mortar, the way voices over radios could sound calm even when chaos unfolded all around. She blinked, and the memory softened, faded back into the edges of her mind, but it left its imprint. Always the leader scoffed, sat back, crossed his arms. You're not fooling anyone, he muttered. Just a sad little woman in a dead-end job. Why don't you go get us another round, sweetheart? Do something useful. The words were meant to sting, to diminish, but they bounced off her harmless. I'm not your sweetheart, she said softly, her voice like a breeze over broken glass, and something in the tone, something to calm, to knowing, made the youngest biker swallow hard. Though boy in the corner booth tugged gently at his mother's sleeve, whispered something too soft to hear, and the mother, wide-eyed, shook her head, whispered back, stay quiet, baby, stay still. But the waitress, she was far from still inside beneath the surface. The heartbeat of memory pounded steady, and as she moved to refill another cup, the sleeve of her uniform shifted slightly, just enough for the edge of ink to show a tattoo, faded but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look forth. Youngest biker saw it first. His eyes widened. He said nothing, but his breathing changed, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. The leader caught the glance, looked down, frowned. What's that on your arm? The question came sharp, sudden, and for the first time. The room itself seemed to lean in, even the wind outside, even the old man near the window, even the boy in the corner booth. And she simply set the coffee pot down slowly, gently, and rolled her sleeve back just an inch more, revealing the worn ink. Faded by time, by sun, by sand, the shape of it was simple, a unit insignia, a mark of service, a memory burned into skin and soul alike. The youngest biker exhaled sharply, low under his breath. Aw, hell. His voice barely more than a whisper. The leader blinked, stared confused at first. Then something else crept in, something colder, older, the dawning realization that the story he thought he was writing was not the story he was standing inside. Asterisk, the leader's eyes locked onto the ink for a moment. He said nothing. His tongue moved across the inside of his cheek, a nervous habit, a tell he didn't even know he had, because somewhere in the back of his mind something primal stirred, something that recognized a line had been crossed. Diner stayed hushed. Every breath, every heart in that room seemed to slow to a crawl. The boy in the corner leaned further forward, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. Even the mother beside him seemed frozen, as if the air itself had thickened. Waiting for something unseen, the waitress didn't speak, didn't need to. The ink spoke for her. The lines of that simple tattoo carried more weight than any raised voice could ever hold, because that mark wasn't decoration, it was memory. It was sacrifice, it was survival. The youngest biker shifted uncomfortably, cleared his throat, tried to force a laugh that came out brittle and wrong. "Hey man, come on, it's just a joke, right? We're just playing around." But the leader's eyes didn't move. They stayed locked, pinned to the curve of that ink, to the story it hinted at, to the truth it could no longer ignore. He swallowed, shifted in his chair, the swagger in his posture slowly unraveling thread by thread. "Weird. You get that?" he finally asked, his voice lower, now rougher, not as sure of itself. The waitress lifted her gaze, met his eyes without flinching. Afghanistan, one word, soft, steady, but it might as well have been thunder, might as well have been an earthquake beneath their feet. Beneath their feet. Afghanistan. The syllables fell into the room and cracked it wide open. The old man by the window set his coffee down, nodded slightly, as if he understood, as if he remembered. To the boy in the corner whispered, "Mom, she's a soldier, isn't she?" The mother didn't answer. Couldn't. Her eyes shone. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled the child closer. The bikers suddenly weren't so loud, weren't so big. The room had shifted, the balance of power reversed, and none of them knew quite what to do with it. The leader ran a hand across his jaw, cleared his throat, eyes darted to his friends, looking for something. A lifeline, a way out of the growing weight pressing down around them. That's so, he muttered, voice weaker. "You were over there?" She nodded once, simple. Truth held without ornament, without embellishment. "I was there," she said quietly, and suddenly, the edges of the room seemed to close, and the laughter that had once echoed, gone, evaporated. Like mist, the youngest biker whispered. Jesus' voice nearly broken, he knew, or at least he guessed, and that guessed, that fragile understanding tore through the bravado. Faster than any threat could have, the waitress reached for the coffee pot again, moved with that same calm grace. Her hands steady as stone, but her mind drifted back across oceans and years. She saw it again, the endless sky over Kandahar, the sharp bark of gunfire, the acrid sting of burning rubber and diesel in the wind, the dust that clung to every breath. She heard the voices again, the shouts, the calls for medics, the crack of radio static. She felt the weight of the rifle in her hands, the way her heart pounded, but her hands stayed steady because they had to, because people were counting on her. Memory slid past her mind like a shadow, and then she was back in the diner, back in the quiet, the bikers still frozen, their faces pale, eyes darting, searching. She set the pot down, took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something deeper. "Something forged in fire and time I served," she said softly. "I did what I had to do, and I came home. That's all there is." To it the leader blinked, licked his lips, looked down at the table, suddenly unable to meet her gaze. He shifted uneasy hands, restless against the wood grain. One of the others, the one with the crooked grin, tried to speak, tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in his throat, because there are some stories, some truths, that silence a room more completely than any shout ever could. The boy in the corner, his eyes wide, spoke softly again, thank you, to words barely more than a breath, but the waitress heard them clearer than anything else, and for the first time her lips lifted, not a full smile, but something close, something soft around the edges. Because those two words, they meant more than the jeers ever could. Asterisk, the leader sat back. The leather of his jacket creaked softly as he shifted in his chair, but the weight of the moment pinned him in place. There was no quick comeback, no sharp retort that could break the spell that had settled over the diner, because some moments, some truths, strip away the armor people wear without ever raising a hand. The waitress, still nameless to them, stood quietly by the counter. Her hands rested lightly against the edge of the formica, her breathing calm, her eyes steady, but inside she could feel the old ache, the deep memory of days when every second was a fight to stay alive, and the weight of her choices, the weight of her duty, was pressed down until she thought she might break, and yet she never did. The youngest biker looked at her differently now. His eyes darted to the tattoo, to the quiet strength in her posture, and something shifted inside him, a flicker of respect. Of regret he swallowed, lowered his eyes. The leader cleared his throat again, but it came out thin dry like a man who suddenly found himself standing on unfamiliar ground. Look, he mumbled. We didn't know. He trailed off, words failing him. Words always fail in the face of things they cannot comprehend. She tilted her head slightly, her expression soft but unreadable. You never know, she said, her voice gentle. Even you never know what someone's carried, what they've survived. Her words weren't sharp, weren't designed to wound. They were simple, true, and that made them heavier than any insult ever could. The other customers stayed quiet. The old man by the window lifted his cup again with hands that no longer trembled. The boy in the corner, still watching, still listening, would remember this long after. The night was over because lessons like this, the ones without raised voices or swinging fists, leave marks deeper than skin. The leader let out a breath, raked a hand through his hair, his bravado unraveling thread by thread. He looked around at his friends, at the others in the room, and for the first time, he looked smaller, less. The shell of the man he thought he was crumbling under the weight of the moment. One of his friends, the one with the crooked grin, muttered under his breath, "Lo, I think we should go." The words were barely more than a whisper, but they settled into the still air like falling ash. The waitress didn't speak. Didn't move, she didn't need to. The decision wasn't hers to make. It was theirs. All she had done was stand her ground, and sometimes that's all it takes to remind people of the line between who they think they are and who they should. Beatty leader's eyes flicked to hers again, and for a moment something raw flickered across his face. Not anger, not defiance, something closer to shame, closer to understanding. He nodded once, a sharp breath drawn through his nose. And then, without another word, he pushed back his chair and stood. The others followed one by one, the scrape of chairs, the soft thud of boots on worn tile. Their footsteps felt louder than they should have, like echoes in a cathedral. The door creaked. The bell chimed softly, and then they were gone. Just like that. The wind outside caught the door as it swung shut. The silence that followed was not tense, not heavy. It was something else, something closer to peace. The waitress exhaled. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Her hands still rested on the counter, but her eyes softened. The old man by the window raised his cup toward her. In quiet salute, the boy in the corner smiled. Small, grateful, and, for the first time that night, something inside her eased. She moved back to her station, poured another cup, wiped the same spot she'd wiped 1,000 times before. The rhythm of ordinary life returning, but the air was different now. The room was different, and somewhere deep inside her, a memory stirred, not with pain, but with pride. Asterisk, the door's gentle chime faded. The sound of engines roared back to life outside, but it felt distant, muted, like something from another world. Entirely inside the diner, stillness settled over everything, a fragile calm born from shared witness. Waitress stood for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on the door as the last traces of tension unwound. From her spine, she let out a breath. She didn't know she had been holding the weight of the past, the weight of what almost happened, both slowly slipping back beneath the surface. The old man by the window gave her a small nod, a quiet gesture that needed no words. Respect, acknowledgement. She met his gaze and offered the faintest smile. It's not for him, not even for herself, but for something deeper, something harder to name. The boy in the corner booth tugged again at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, she's a hero." The words carried clear, bright in the quiet. The mother hushed him softly, but her own eyes shone. Her lips trembled with emotion she couldn't quite contain. The waitress turned her hands, moving almost by muscle, memory wiping the counter, filling cups, the ordinary rhythm of her life settling back into place. But inside the echoes still rang the voices of the past. The shadows of another life lived half a world away. Her fingers brushed the edge of the scar on her forearm, the ink of the tattoo barely visible beneath the soft fabric of her sleeve. She could still feel the desert sun on her skin, the sting of sweat in her eyes, the heaviness of the gear, the sound of her brothers and sisters calling through the dust. For a moment she was there again, the heat, the chaos, the weight of life and death hanging in the air, and then the memory softened, faded back, leaving only the steady hum of the present. The boy's voice pulled her back fully. "Thank you," he said again. This time louder, clearer, his small face full of earnestness, of wonder, the kind of innocence the world hadn't yet taken from him. She swallowed, her throat tight, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to really meet his gaze, to really see him. "Thank you," she said softly, the words foreign on her tongue, but true. "Thank you for seeing me," the mother offered a soft smile. Her eyes wet, her hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder, and in that moment the warmth that filled the space was almost enough to chase the old ghosts away. The door chimed again, this time gentle, another customer arriving. Life moving forward, time never stopping. The waitress smoothed her apron, turned with a quiet breath, and stepped back into the rhythm of the diner. But something was different now. Not just in her, but in the space itself, a shift. A small fracture in the ordinary that would never quite heal over, because sometimes the quietest battles, the ones no one sees, leave the deepest marks, and sometimes a single night, a single moment, is enough to remind the world that courage doesn't always wear a uniform, that heroes walk among us unnoticed, till the moment they are called to rise. The plates clattered, the coffee poured, the wind howled softly outside, and somewhere far away, the desert wind still whispered across the sands, carrying the memory of those who served, those who returned, and those who never came home. But here in this little diner on the edge of nowhere, one woman stood steady, unseen by most, but not forgotten. The shift moved on. Their shift moved on, ours melted slowly, the hum of the overhead lights, the clink of forks on porcelain, the soft shuffle of shoes on worn tile. Life inside the diner settled back into its usual rhythm, but beneath it all, something had shifted. Something small, something quiet, but unshakable. The waitress moved from table to table, her hands steady, her face calm, but her heart beat differently now. Not from fear, not from anger, but from something harder to name, a quiet weight, a familiar ache in the corner. The boy still watched her, his young eyes wide, curious, the way only children can be when they sense something larger than themselves. The mother leaned close to him, whispered gentle words, but the boy's gaze never left her, and when she passed near their table, he offered her the kind of smile that didn't need words. Pure Holsha smiled back softly, a warmth blooming inside her that she hadn't felt in years. Not since before the war, not since before the sound of helicopters, the crack of gunfire. The endless stretch of desert that seemed to swallow everything. Her mind drifted without her meaning it to. Back across oceans and time, back to the heat, the dust, the faces of the ones she served with, faces she could still see in her sleep, some of them still here, some of them gone forever. She remembered one in particular, a friend, a brother in arms, the way he used to whistle old country songs beneath his breath, the way he always carried an extra photo of his daughter folded into his vest, the way he smiled even on the worst days. She remembered the day she held his hand as the medics worked, the way his eyes never left hers, even as the light in them faded. She swallowed hard, blinking the memory away. The diner blurred around her for a moment, voices rising and falling, but her breath stayed steady. She had learned how to come back from the edge, how to anchor herself when the ghosts pressed too close. She wiped the same counter she had wiped 1,000 times, her fingers brushing over the familiar grains of wood, her reflection faint in the glass, and for a moment she saw both versions of herself, the woman she had been, the woman she was now, both coexisting, both real. The door chimed again. A family stepped in, laughter spilling around them. Coats tugged tight against the chill outside. Life moved forward. It always did. It always had to. She greeted them with the same warm tone, guided them to a booth, poured coffee, smiled, but deep inside a tiny ember glowed, a piece of her that had felt buried for so long, now stirred back to life. It wasn't about recognition, it wasn't about gratitude, it was about something else, something harder. To define the simple truth that sometimes, even when the world forgets, even when the battles are fought in silence, even when the medals gather dust in the dark corners of closets, the story still matters. The person still matters, the old man near. The window caught her eye again, lifted his cup in another small salute, and she returned it. A shared understanding between two people who had seen too much, said too little, and survived anyway. The boy in the corner scribbled something on a napkin with a borrowed pen, his tongue sticking out in concentration. His mother smiled, her eyes softer, now her shoulders less tight. Waitress let the warmth of the moment fill her. Let it push back the shadows, if only for a little while, because some battles, the hardest ones, are the ones you carry long after the war is over. The wind whispered outside. The door chimed, the plates clattered, and somewhere beneath it all, the heartbeat of memory pulsed steady and strong. Asterisk, the napkin and the boys. Hands took shape slowly, lines drawn in careful strokes, small gift forming out of paper and ink. The waitress moved through the motions of the evening, filling cups, clearing plates, smiling in that quiet way she always did, but every so often her eyes drifted back to the corner booth, to the boy who had looked at her, not with fear, not with judgment, but with something rare, something truth. The bikers were long gone, their presence nothing more than a shadow, a fading echo, and yet the weight of what had passed lingered, not heavy, not suffocating, but present, like the scent of rain after a storm. The kind of weight that reminds you are still standing. She paused at the counter, her hand resting on the worn edge. And for a moment, the memory returned again, sharper, this time the sound of boots in sand, the calls over radios, asterisk, the deafening crack of explosions rolling across open desert. Her hands clutching a rifle, clutching a friend, clutching hope when it felt like there was none but. Then a breath, steady, a single inhale pulled her back, the clink of silverware, the soft murmur of conversation, the smell of coffee and pie, and she was here again. Now, the boy stood, his small sneakers padding softly across the worn floor, the napkin clutched carefully in his hand. He stopped at her side, held it out without a word, his eyes wide, hopeful, unsure. She looked down, took the napkin gently, her fingers brushing his, and when she opened it, her breath caught it. Was a drawing, simple, childlike, but powerful in its honesty, a stick figure, a woman in uniform, a tiny American flag waving beside her, beneath it, the shaky handwriting of a child. Thank you for being brave. Her throat tightened, the edges of her vision blurred for a heartbeat. She knelt, lowered herself so they were eye to eye, and for the first time that night her voice broke just slightly. Thank you, she whispered back. Her hand rested lightly over her heart. Thank you for this. The boy smiled, a bright, unguarded smile, the kind only children can give, and in that moment something inside her eased, something that had been locked away for too long. The mother stood, her eyes shining. She placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. Come on, honey, let's get going. But she met the waitress's gaze, held it for just a moment longer, and in that look there was no pity, no discomfort, only gratitude. They left, the bell chimed. The cold wind swirled in, then faded as the door closed behind them. The napkin remained in her hands. Her fingers traced the edges, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it, not the weight of memory, not the weight of pain, but the weight of being seen. She folded the napkin carefully, tucked it into her apron. Pocket a small piece of paper, but somehow something larger than that, something that would stay with Hertha. Old man by the window gathered his coat, his steps slow but steady. He paused at the door, met her eyes, gave one last nod, a silent salute. Between strangers, and then he too stepped into the night. The diner quieted the hours, slipping onward, the ordinary folding itself back over the extraordinary. But the warmth, the shift remained. The waitress poured another cup, wiped another table, the motions as familiar as breathing, but her heart held something new. Or maybe something rediscovered. The wind whispered beyond the windows, the clock ticked, and somewhere deep inside, the quiet beat of resilience, of survival, of unseen courage, continued on. Asterisk, the night deepened, the hours stretched thin, and still she moved. The waitress, her hands steady, her breath even, each motion familiar, each step measured, the soft clatter of plates, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, the world returning to its ordinary shape. But beneath the surface, something remained, forever changed. Napkin in her pocket, pressed lightly against her side, a simple scrap of paper, but to her it felt heavier than steel, heavier than any metal, because it was real. Because it came from a place untouched by politics or pity. It came from the unfiltered heart of a child who had seen something, who had recognized something, and named it for what it was. Bravery. Her fingers brushed the pocket now and then, checking, as if needing the small reassurance that it was still there, and every time she did, her heart steadied a little more. The edges of old wounds softened, just slightly. The wind howled softly outside, the kind of wind that sweeps across empty roads and forgotten places, the kind of wind that carries stories, whispers them to the night. The door chimed again. A single man in a trucker's cap entered, nodded politely, took a seat near the far wall. She greeted him as she greeted everyone. Warm, steady, kind, her voice, even after everything, still held gentleness, because war takes many things, but it had not taken her kindness, not entirely. Not forever. The man ordered coffee black, no sugar, and she poured it without missing a beat. The steam rose in gentle curls, her reflection caught faintly in the window glass, a reflection of someone who had come through not unscathed, but unbroken. Her mind drifted again. Without warning, back to the desert, back to the endless hum of helicopters overhead, the flash of sunlight off metal, the way the air smelled different there, the way time stretched and collapsed all at once, and she remembered the hand she held, the one she let go, the name she never forgot.
Ow.
The faces burned into the deepest parts of her memory, the weight of it pressed against her ribs, but she breathed through it steady, even because she had learned how to carry it, had learned how to hold it without letting it consume her most days. The trucker nodded his thanks. She smiled. Softly, life moved as it always does. The ordinary pressed forward, covering the extraordinary like soil over roots, but deep down the roots remain. The door chimed again. A couple entered, laughing softly, their breath misting in the cold. She led them to a booth, took their orders, smiled with that quiet grace, and every motion, every word carried the weight of her story, even if they never knew it, because every person holds unseen chapters. Battles fought, losses carried, triumphs quietly treasured. And tonight, in this small, forgotten place, her story had been seen, even if just for a moment. The boys drawing the old man's nod, the silence of the bikers as they left, all of it lingered. All of it settled into her bones. The hours ticked by. The night deepened further, and still she stood still. She moved still. She served the quiet warrior. The hidden heart outside, the wind pressed against the glass inside. The warmth of the diner glowed soft and steady, and somewhere far beyond the echoes of distant sands of forgotten battles faded just a little more. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady rhythm marking time in a place that felt untouched by the rush of the outside world. The hands moved, minutes passed, and the waitress still. Standing still, steady, let the motions carry her. Her body remembered even when her mind drifted, the endless repetition of pouring coffee, clearing plates, wiping down the same worn counters. There was comfort in the familiar, in the things that did not ask too much of her soul, but tonight something deeper stirred. The moment with the bikers, the boys drawing the quiet nod from the old man, each piece stitched itself into her chest. Warming places that had long gone cold, her hand brushed. The pocket again, the folded napkin still there, still real, still anchoring her in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't medals or parades or speeches that made her feel seen. It was this quiet, this ordinary, this tiny, unexpected kindness. Wind rattled the windows, the night stretched long, and she let her breath move through her slowly and out a rhythm she had learned long ago. In places where panic could kill, where control meant survival, she paused by the jukebox in the corner, a relic from another time, the soft glow of its lights casting gentle colors on the floor. Her fingertips brushed the smooth glass, and without quite thinking, she pressed a button. A soft old song, one she hadn't heard in years, filled the space. A voice, low and gravelly, singing about home, about loss, about coming back. The melody wrapped around her, wove through the empty spaces, and for a moment, her eyes closed, not to escape, but to remember, to honor. She thought of them, the ones who didn't make it back, the ones whose stories ended far from home, the ones whose laughter still echoed in her memories. She whispered their names silently. Each syllable a prayer, a promise, a remembrance. Her eyes opened slowly. The song playing on the door remained. Closed. The wind outside howled softly, and she moved again, each step carrying her forward, each breath a quiet act of resilience. A couple near the window smiled at her. She smiled back. The man in the trucker's cap raised his cup. She nodded. The world, small as it was, held steady around her. The boy's napkin pressed against her side, a simple weight, but a reminder that even in places of silence, even in places of small lives and forgotten roads, courage mattered, stories mattered, and sometimes the smallest kindness, the quietest thank you, could bring the heart back to life. The song faded. The clock ticked on, and she stood in the glow of the diner, in the soft hum of the ordinary, alive, steady whole land. though the night stretched long and though the wind whispered of faraway places, she knew, without question, that she was more than the scars, more than the ghosts, more than the weight she carried. She was here, and that in the end was enough. Asterisk, the hands on the clock crept closer to midnight. The night outside stretched quiet and vast. The diner's hum softened as the last. Few customers settled into their meals, and through it all she moved the waitress, the soldier. The woman who carried stories no one else could see, her fingers brushed the counter, her eyes drifted to the window, where reflections blurred against the dark. And for a heartbeat, she caught the faintest glimpse of herself, not as she was now, but as she had been in uniform, in motion. In moments where every breath could be the last, the memories came without warning. They always did, unbidden, uncontrolled. She saw the desert again. The haze of heat rising from cracked earth, the endless stretch of horizon, the sharp crack of distant gunfire. She felt the weight of the rifle in her hands, the sting of sweat in her eyes, the voices shouting over radio static, and the silence that followed the heavy hollow. Unbearable silence. Her breath hitched, but only for a moment, because she had learned how to come back, how to find the edges of the now. When the past tried to pull her under, she steadied herself, her hand resting lightly against the cool surface of the counter, and she breathed slow, steady, present. Couple in the booth laughed softly, a gentle sound that pulled her back. The trucker sipped his coffee, the jukebox light flickered, and the world anchored her once more, the napkins still folded carefully in her pocket. Pressed against her side like a steadying hand, the boy's simple drawing, a reminder that sometimes even the smallest gestures could carry more weight than any metal ever could. She moved to clear a table, her hands graceful, her steps quiet. And though the ache in her bones whispered of long days and older wounds, she let the warmth of the diner settle over her, let it fill the cracks the memories left behind. The car passed by, outside headlights sweeping briefly across the glass, and for an instant she felt the pull again, the sharp memory of convoy lights. The endless desert road, the way every movement out there could mean danger, but then the car was gone, and the quiet of the diner held her fast, anchored her in the here. The door chimed softly as the couple left, their breath misted in the cold as they stepped into the night. The man offered her a quiet thank you. The woman smiled, and then they were gone. The bell swinging gently in their wakes, she exhaled, her fingers tightening briefly around the edge of a plate before she set it down. And in the stillness, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it, all of it. The past, the present, the pieces of herself she had tried so hard to bury beneath the ordinary, but tonight the walls had cracked, not enough to shatter, but enough to let the light in. She touched the napkin again, fingers gentle, and though her lips barely moved, the words came anyway, soft, a whisper meant for no one but herself. I'm still here, and the truth of it settled deep, steady, unbreakable. The wind outside sighed, the old jukebox glowed, and she moved through the quiet, through the warmth, through the fragile beauty of survival, one breath, one step at a time. Asterisk, the hours stretched thinner. The hum of the diner softened into something almost sacred, a quiet so gentle. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She moved through it. The waitress, the soldier, the survivor, the last of the dishes were cleared. The tables wiped down, the chairs pushed gently back into place, each small motion carried a kind of reverence, a ritual she had repeated countless times. But tonight every gesture felt heavier, more meaningful. Her fingertips grazed the old napkin in her pocket once more, the drawing worn soft at the edges already, the ink smudged just slightly from her touch, and yet it remained a fragile anchor in a world that so often forgot the weight people carried in silence. She paused by the window, her reflection barely visible in the dark beyond the glass. The world stretched out, empty roads, black sky, the faint glow of distant headlights tracing ribbons through the night. And for a breath, a single breath, she let herself feel the distance between who she had been and who she was now. Her hands rested lightly against the glass, and her mind, as it so often did, wandered back to heat, to the dust, to the smell of diesel and sweat, the sharp crack of gunfire, the taste of fear, the sound of breath rasping through dry lips. She could still hear the voices, the laughter shared and stolen moments, the prayers whispered under breath, the weight of decisions that could never be undone. She remembered the faces one by one, Those she came home with, those she didn't, their names etched into the quiet corners of her heart, never spoken aloud. But never forgotten. The wind outside. Rose pushed gently against the glass, and she blinked. Returning, recentering her breath slow, her hands steady, she stepped back, turned. The soft glow of the diner lights washing over her like warmth after cold. And she allowed herself just briefly to feel proud. Not of medals, not of survival alone, but of standing still, standing after everything's. Moved back behind the counter, wiped her hands on her apron. The jukebox flickered. The trucker near the edge. Back offered her a quiet nod as he stood to leave. She returned it soft, grateful. The bell above the door chimed again. And as the door closed behind him, she stood alone in the soft stillness of the place that had become her refuge, her battlefield. Of another kind. A place where she fought different ghosts, faced different enemies, and somehow kept going. Clock ticked, the wind howled, and she pressed her hand against the napkin. One more time, her breath soft, her heart steady, because survival isn't always loud. It isn't always marked by parades or speeches. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's the simple act of standing, of breathing, of choosing to move forward when everything inside says not to. The lights flickered, the wind sighed, and she stood in the heart of it all, a silent monument to battles, fought and battles still to come. Asterisk. The minutes passed slow, measured, each breath filling the quiet in ways no words could. She moved through the motions, wiping down the last tables, checking the old coffee pot, stacking worn menus back into their place. But her mind as always moved elsewhere. She felt it again. The distant hum of helicopters, the sharp sting of desert winds, the way the ground trembled under distant fire, the way breath caught sharp and tight when fear pressed in. She had been there, had lived through what most people only saw on screens, and now here she was in this small, forgotten place, carrying all of it in her bones, in her blood, in the rhythm of her heart. The napkin in her pocket pressed gently against her side, and she let her fingertips brush it once more. A talisman, a tiny, fragile proof that the world still held softness. That kindness could still find her even here, even after everything. Lights above buzzed softly. The last traces of music from the jukebox faded into the stillness, and she allowed herself for the first time in what felt like hours to sit. She lowered herself onto the corner stool behind the counter, her hands resting on her knees. Her breath slow, measured, the weight of exhaustion settling into her bones, but alongside it something steadier, something softer. Faces of the bikers flashed briefly behind her eyes, their smirks, their laughter, but she didn't feel anger, didn't feel the old familiar burn of bitterness. She felt something else entirely, pity perhaps, or maybe sadness. Sadness for the smallness of their cruelty, sadness for the way some people needed to hurt others to feel big. Her mind shifted. The boy's face replaced theirs, his wide eyes, his shy smile. The careful lines of his drawing, and her chest tightened, not with pain, but with something closer to hope. She reached into her pocket, unfolded the napkin, carefully smoothed it across her lap, and traced the shaky letters with her fingertip. "Thank you for being brave." The words blurred slightly as her eyes filled, but she let them, didn't fight it. The tears came soft, silent, sliding down her cheeks without fanfare, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself feel all of it. The grief, the gratitude, the weight of memory. The quiet ache of survival. Her shoulders shook, her breath caught, but she didn't turn away, didn't hide from it. She stayed fully present, fully alive in the moment, because sometimes the bravest thing is not the battle, not the gunfire, not the fight. Sometimes the bravest thing is simply to feel, to allow the heart to break open, to let the weight settle without pushing it away. The wind rattled the windows, the clock on the wall ticked steady, and she sat there alone in the quiet, but not lonely, not truly. Her tears slowed. Her breath steadied, and after a while she folded the napkin carefully once more, tucked it back into her pocket, and stood. The last lights flickered gently overhead. Her hands moved through the closing rituals, turning off the machines, locking the doors, wiping the counters one final time. Outside the night stretched vast, endless, but inside her a small warmth remained, a light not fully extinguished hand. As she stepped to the door, keys in hand, she paused, let her fingers rest on the frame, and whispered softly to the empty air, "I'm still here." The wind caught her words, carried them out into the dark, and she smiled small, real, and closed the door behind her asterisk. The door clicked softly behind her. The keys jingled in her hand as she locked the entrance for the night. The wind pressed against her face. Cool, sharp, but somehow gentle to the quiet of the world outside, stretched wide and endless the stars overhead, glimmered in the black pinpricks of distant fire, distant hope. She stood still for a moment, letting the night settle over her, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Her eyes lifted toward the sky, and for the first time, in what felt like days, she let herself breathe fully, let her chest rise and fall without tension. The road stretched out before her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark. The parking lot was empty. Her car waited in the far corner. Silent still she made her way across the cracked pavement, her footsteps soft against the ground, and each step felt lighter somehow, as if the weight she carried had shifted, loosened its grip just a little. The napkin pressed against her side, a steadying presence even. Here, even now, she paused by the driver's side door, her fingers resting on the cold metal, and her eyes lifted one more time toward the sky, the stars above. The same stars she had stared at in desert nights, the same stars that had witnessed every loss, every breath, every choice, and somehow here they were, still shining, unchanged, and she was still standing beneath them. She let her breath move slow, soft, let the memory of the boy's voice echo gently in her mind. Thank you for being brave. The words wrapped around her, settled deep, and her heart, long guarded, long weathered, opened just a little wider. The wind tugged at her hair. She closed her eyes, felt the stillness of the world, felt the ache, felt the survival, felt the soft, fragile beauty of simply being alive. When she opened her eyes, the weight hadn't vanished, but it had softened. The scars were still there. The ghosts still whispered, but she had faced them, had stood her ground, not with anger, not with violence, but with the quiet strength that comes from having already seen the worst the world can offer and choosing to stand anyway. She slid into the car. The door closed with a soft click. The engine rumbled to life beneath her hands, and as the headlights swept across the empty lot, she let herself smile, small, real, a quiet victory that belonged to no one else but her. The diner faded behind her as she pulled onto the road. The dark stretched before her, but it no longer felt endless. It no longer felt hollow. Boy's drawing remained close. The warmth of his words held fast. And as the miles rolled beneath her tires, she carried it all with her, the weight, the memory. The courage, because survival isn't always about what's left behind. Sometimes it's about what you carry forward, what you refuse to let be taken from you, no matter how many battles you fought. The stars shimmered above. The road stretched on, and she, the waitress, the warrior, the survivor, drove on through the night, her heart steady, her breath strong, her story still unfolding, 1 mile, 1 moment at a time. Asterisk. The tires hummed softly against the asphalt, a steady rhythm beneath the quiet of the night. The headlights carved a silver path through the darkness. The road stretched out before her, empty, endless, but for once it didn't feel lonely. She kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting lightly in her lap. Her fingertips brushed the folded napkin tucked safely into her pocket, a simple touch, a simple weight. But it steadied her in ways nothing else could. The soft glow of the dashboard lit her face, her eyes focused, her breath slow. Each mile brought her closer to home, but more than that, each mile felt like something being shed, an old heaviness loosening its grip, a quiet unraveling of walls she didn't even know she had built. She thought of the boy, the way his eyes had shone with something pure, the way his small hands had carefully drawn each line. Thank you for being brave, the words echoed softly. In her mind, carrying warmth where so much cold had lived for so long, her mind drifted not to the violence, not to the worst of it, but to the small moments that had kept her alive. The laughter shared in dusty tents, the letters folded and unfolded. 100 times the quiet songs hummed under breath when the world felt too big. The hands that had reached for hers when the fear pressed in too tight, those were the memories she let rise now. Not the horror, not the loss, but the love, the humanity. The pieces of herself that had somehow remained untouched despite everything. The wind outside rushed past, the stars hung high and endless, and she let herself feel it all. The ache, the hope, the fragile beauty of having survived. Her fingers tightened, briefly around the wheel, and she whispered into the quiet thank you, the words not for anyone in particular, but for everything, for the chance to still be here, for the chance to still move forward. No matter how heavy the past, no matter how deep. The scars the road curved gently. The lights of her small neighborhood began to glow on the horizon. And as the distance between the diner and home narrowed, she felt something in her chest loosen further. A knot that had been there for years unraveling. Slowly, one breath, one heartbeat at a time, she thought again of the bikers. The way their laughter had faltered, the way their bravado had crumbled in the face of something they couldn't understand. Didn't feel bitterness, she felt pity, and then she let it go, released it into the dark, like ash on the wind. The car slowed as she turned onto the familiar road, the porch light glowing softly ahead, the shapes of trees swaying gently in the breeze. She exhaled her breath, misting the glass, and for the first time in so long the weight she carried felt bearable. The engine quieted as she pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching softly over gravel. She sat for a moment longer, her hands resting. Still, her heart steady, the napkin still pressed against her side, reminded her she was seen. She was still here, and somehow that was enough. The wind whispered through the trees, the stars blinked above. And she stepped out into the quiet, her footsteps soft against the earth, her breath steady, her story unfolding still. The porch light cast a soft golden glow across the steps. The house stood still, quiet, the windows dark, except for the small lamp left on inside, a familiar shape, a place she had returned to night after night, and yet tonight it felt different. Somehow she stood for a moment by the car, her breath visible in the cold air. The keys heavy in her hand, her eyes lifted toward the porch, toward the door she knew so well, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She crossed the small stretch of gravel, her footsteps soft measured. The weight of the day, the weight of memory, all of it still there, but quieter, less sharp, less consuming. The key slid into the lock, the door clicked open, and the warmth of the small house greeted her soft shadows. The faint scent of lavender from the old candle she kept by the window, the quiet hum of the heater in the corner. Home simple, safe. She closed the door behind her, set the keys gently on the worn wooden table, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface without thinking. The stillness of the space wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time, she let herself exhale fully. Her coat slid from her shoulders. Her shoes tucked neatly by the door, the old kettle already half filled on the stove. The motions came easy, natural, but inside something had shifted. Something she could feel in her bones. She reached into her pocket, her fingers curling around the folded napkin, careful, reverent. She pulled it free, held it in both hands, beneath the soft light of the kitchen lamp. The child's drawing, the shaky lines, the words. Thank you for being brave. Her breath caught, her throat tightened, and she pressed the napkin gently against her heart. Her eyes drifted closed, and memory rose again. Not the pain this time, not the loss, but the small moments. The ones that had carried her through, the sound of laughter under desert stars, the warmth of a shared canteen. Passed between hands, the soft hum of old songs whispered into the dark, the touch of another soldier's hand on her shoulder after a long night, the simple weight of knowing she was not alone. She opened her eyes, slowly set the napkin down gently on the table, and for a long moment she simply stood there, her fingers resting against the wood, her breath steady, her heart full. The kettle clicked softly behind her, the water ready. She moved through the familiar motions, tea bag cup, the soft steam rising in delicate curls, each step grounding her deeper into the present. She carried the cup to the worn armchair near the window, settled herself into the cushions, her legs tucked beneath her, the weight of the warm mug in her hands. And outside, the wind moved through the trees, the night stretched wide, but here inside there was peace, a fragile, precious kind of peace she had long thought unreachable. Her eyes drifted toward the napkin on the table, the soft edges of it glowing gently in the lamplight, and a small smile tugged at her lips, real, unforced, the kind that starts not on the mouth, but in the chest. The tea warmed her hands, the quiet wrapped around her, and she let herself sit in it, let herself be held by it, because survival, she realized, is not always about holding on with both fists. Sometimes it's about letting go, about allowing the world to touch you again. about opening the door to the small mercies still waiting to be found. Her eyes closed, her breath softened, and she let the night carry her gently forward. The porch light cast a soft golden glow across the steps. The house stood still quiet, the windows dark, except for the small lamp left on inside. A familiar shape, a place she had returned to night after night, and yet tonight it felt different somehow. She stood for a moment by the car, her breath visible in the cold air, the keys heavy in her hand. Her eyes lifted toward the porch, toward the door she knew so well, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She crossed the small stretch of gravel, her footsteps soft measured the weight of the day, the weight of memory, all of it still there, but quieter, less sharp, less consuming. The key slid into the lock, the door clicked open, and the warmth of the small house greeted her soft shadows. The faint scent of lavender from the old candle she kept by the window, the quiet hum of the heater in the corner home, simple safe. She closed the door behind her, set the keys gently on the worn wooden table, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface without thinking. The stillness of the space wrapped around her like a blanket. And for the first time she let herself exhale fully. Her coat slid from her shoulders, her shoes tucked neatly by the door. The stove, the motions came easy, natural, but inside something had shifted. Something she could feel in her bones. She reached into her pocket, her fingers curling around the folded napkin. Careful, reverent, she pulled it free, held it in both hands beneath. The soft light of the kitchen lamp, the child's drawing, the shaky lines, the words. "Thank you for being brave." Her breath caught, her throat tightened, and she pressed the napkin gently against her heart. Her eyes drifted closed, and memory rose again. Not the pain this time, not the loss, but the small moments, the ones that had carried her through. The sound of laughter under desert stars. The warmth of a shared canteen passed between hands, the soft hum of old songs whispered into the dark, the touch of another soldier's hand on her shoulder after a long night, the simple weight of knowing she was not alone. She opened her eyes slowly, set the napkin down gently on the table, and for a long moment she simply stood there, her fingers resting against the wood, her breath steady, her heart full. The kettle clicked softly behind her. The water ready, she moved through the familiar motions, teabag cup, the soft steam rising in delicate curls. Each step grounding her deeper into the present. She carried the cup to the worn armchair near the window, settled herself into the cushions, her legs tucked beneath her. The weight of the warm mug in her hands, and outside the wind moved through the trees. The night stretched wide, but here inside there was peace, a fragile, precious kind of peace she had long thought unreachable. Her eyes drifted toward the napkin on the table, the soft edges of it glowing gently in the lamplight. And a small smile tugged at her lips, real, unforced, the kind that starts not on the mouth, but in the chest. The tea warmed her hands. The quiet wrapped around her, and she let herself sit in it. Let herself be held by it, because survival, she realized, is not always about holding on with both fists. Sometimes it's about letting go, about allowing the world to touch you again, about opening the door to the small mercies still waiting to be found. Her eyes closed, her breath softened, and she let the night carry her gently forward. The tea sat forgotten on the side table. Steam long since faded, the house had fallen into deeper stillness. The kind of quiet that only comes in the darkest hours before dawn, but she remained in the chair wrapped in the hush, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her breath soft and steady. The weight of the day pressed into her bones, but it was not the crushing heaviness she had grown used to carrying. It was different, softer. Something had shifted. Something had changed, not in the world outside, but inside. Her eyes drifted to the napkin. Once more, the simple child's drawing glowing gently in the low light, a small thing, easily overlooked by anyone else, but to her it was everything. A symbol of recognition, of quiet gratitude, of being seen in a way she had not been in years. She rose from the chair slowly, her body stiff, but not broken, her footsteps soft against the floor as she crossed to the table. Her fingers brushed the napkin's edge, and without fully understanding why, she lifted it, carefully carried it to the old bookshelf tucked near the wall, the shelves lined with paperbacks, photographs, dusty mementos of a life lived in fragments. She slid the napkin between the pages of a worn journal, a place where she kept pieces of herself too fragile for display notes. Letters, old photographs that carried more weight than words could hold. The napkin folded gently inside, protected, honored her. Fingers lingered on the spine of the journal, a soft smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. She exhaled, let her hand fall away, and turned back toward the heart of the house. The night pressed close beyond the windows. The wind still whispered through the trees, but inside her a calm had settled, a peace made not from forgetting, but from remembering fully, from allowing the past to live alongside the present without drowning it. She moved through the house, each step soft, each breath deep. The photograph on the wall caught her eye again. The desert behind the faces, the laughter that still echoed if she let herself hear it. She reached out her fingertips, brushing the frame, and whispered their names softly under her breath, names she would never forget. Names etched into the marrow of her bones. Names that held both grief and gratitude in equal measure. The kettle still sat on the stove, the last flicker of warmth fading from the mug, but she let it be. Some things didn't need finishing. Some things simply needed to exist as they were, unfinished, unpolished, whole in their imperfection. The clock ticked. The house sighed, and she made her way toward the bedroom, the heaviness in her chest easing with every step. The weight she carried still there, always there, but tonight it did not define her. A napkin safe in its resting place, the memories softened. The kindness of strangers lingering like a quiet song. She paused at the threshold, her fingers resting lightly on the doorframe, and for a moment she closed her eyes, let herself feel the fullness of this.
Ow.
The survival, the breath still moving through her, the fragile, powerful beauty of simply being here. The world outside moved on. The winds howled, the stars blinked, but she remained alive, unbroken enough. She stepped inside, her breath steady, her heart soft, and the night at last held her gently. Bedroom held its own kind of quiet, soft shadows stretched across the walls, the faded comfort of old quilts layered neatly on the bed. A small lamp by the nightstand cast a golden glow, gentle, warm, and for the first time in what felt like years, the room felt like more than just a place to sleep. It felt like sanctuary. She crossed the threshold slowly, her fingertips brushing the worn edge of the doorframe, her breath moving in and out with quiet steadiness. The weight in her chest had shifted. Not gone, never fully gone, but softer, bearable. Her eyes landed on the small wooden box that sat on the nightstand. The edges smoothed by time and touch. Inside, she knew, were pieces of the past she rarely let herself see. Medals, dog tags, photographs, to worn to hang on walls, letters written in shaky hands during long, lonely nights overseas. For a moment she hesitated, her fingers resting gently on the lid. And then with the smallest breath she lifted it open. The contents were as she remembered, each piece telling a story, each fragment carrying its own weight. But tonight they felt different in her hands, not as sharp, not as unbearable. She lifted the dog tags carefully, the chain cool against her skin, the metal catching the soft lamplight. Her thumb brushed over the engraved letters, each one familiar, each one sacred. Memory stirred. The sound of distant gunfire, the feel of desert wind against her face, the laughter shared in stolen moments. The voices she would carry forever. She let the memories come, let them move through her without resistance. Her breath steadied, her heart did not race. The panic that so often clung to the edges of her mind did not rise, because tonight something inside her had shifted. Something fragile, something real. She set the dog tags gently back into the box, her fingers tracing the edges one last time before closing the lid. The weight of them still pressed into her palm, but it no longer pulled her under it, no longer held her hostage. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes soft, and for a long while she simply sat, letting the quiet hold her. The wind outside whispered against the windows. The soft creak of the house settled around her, and she felt it again, that thread of something new, something she hadn't let herself feel in so long. Hope, small, delicate, but real. The boys drawing, the old man's nod, the simple kindness of strangers. They had found her, reached her, pulled her gently back toward the light. She had forgotten she still carried. She exhaled softly, her hands brushing the fabric of her jeans, her heart steady, the weight of memory no longer suffocating, but instead something she could carry with grace. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The house held its breath, and she, in the center of it all, closed her eyes, let herself feel the stillness, let herself rest in the truth of survival. In the quiet, unspoken beauty of it, all her breath moved soft, and even her body heavy with exhaustion. But her spirit, her heart, lightened in ways she could not yet fully name them. Stars above held their vigil, the wind sang its soft song, and the woman who had walked through fire, who had stood in places where the world burns and breaks, sat in the quiet, alive, still here, still whole. The stillness of the room wrapped around her like soft fabric, the edges of the night stretched wide, but inside her, a calm had settled. Something rare, something fragile, but real her. Hands rested quietly in her lap, her eyes half closed, and she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, not just the heaviness of memory, but the quiet triumph to the simple fact of breath, of presence, of stillness. House hummed softly around her, the wind against the windows, the soft tick of the clock. These sounds grounded her, anchored her in the moment, reminding her she was far from the desert, far from the roar of engines, far from the echoes of war that had once followed her home. She rose from the bed with slow, careful movements, her body stiff from the hours on her feet, but she welcomed the ache, welcomed the hum of tired muscles that spoke not of survival, but of living, of working, of ordinary days. The wooden box remained on the nightstand. Closed now, but not hidden, she traced her fingers gently. Across its surface, a silent promise to the past, a silent honoring of what she had come through them. Napkin tucked safely between the pages of her journal in the other room, pulled at her thoughts. Not with heaviness, but with warmth. The boy's words had carved themselves deep, softening the hardest corners of her heart. Reminding her that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight, she stepped toward the window, the curtain drawn back just slightly, and looked out into the darkness. The stars scattered high above, unmoving, unchanging, and in their stillness, she found comfort. She breathed in the air, cool, clean, and in that breath, she felt something release inside her, a letting go, a quiet surrender of burdens she no longer needed to carry so tightly. Her reflection caught in the glass, the faint outline of her face, the softened edges of her eyes. And for the first time and longer than she could remember, she didn't turn away, didn't flinch from the image she met her own. Gaze steady, whole alive, the wind sighed, the night deepened, and still she stood, her breath slow, her heart steady, her spirit grounded in the simple, sacred truth of presence. She pressed her fingertips gently to the glass, a soft touch, and whispered, words meant only for herself. I made it. The words barely more than breath, but they held, they carried. She stepped back, let the curtain fall, softly closed, and turned toward the bed, her body heavy with the exhaustion of the day, but her heart for the first time in so long light. She settled beneath the covers, her breath moving in soft, even rhythms. The old quilt pulled to her chest, her eyes fluttered closed, and the house, the night, the world held her. The past still lived inside her, the scars still marked her, but tonight she would rest. Tonight she would let the softness carry her, let the stillness hold her, let herself drift into sleep unburdened, untouched by the shadows that once ruled her nights. The wind whispered outside, the stars held silent vigil, and she, the woman who had seen so much, who had endured, who had survived, sank into sleep at last. The night carried her gently. Sleep found her in the quiet way it sometimes does when the heart has been worn thin. Her breath moved soft and steady, her body heavy beneath the old quilt, and for the first time and longer than she could name, the dreams that came were not sharp, not filled with the jagged edges of memory, but something gentler, something lighter. The wind pressed softly against the windows, the house held its breath, and within that stillness she drifted deeper, her mind loosening its grip on the weight it so often carried in the quiet space between waking and sleep. Images rose unbidden, but they were not the sharp echoes of gunfire, not the blinding flash of explosions. Instead, she saw faces warm, familiar, the people she had loved, the ones she had fought beside, the ones who had shaped her without ever fully leaving her. She saw their laughter, heard the way they told stories in the dark, saw the way they passed time, day after day, moment after moment, holding on to scraps of normalcy in a place where nothing was normal. The dream shifted, the edges soft, the air filled with golden light, the sound of wind through distant trees, and she stood there whole, unbroken, surrounded by the echoes of those she had lost and those who still lived inside her heart. The boy's voice wove through the dream, soft, pure. "Thank you for being brave." The words wrapped around her gentle bum against the scars that so often burned, and she let them hold her. Let the warmth of them seep deep into the places that had grown cold. Her breath moved in steady rhythm, her heart beat slow. And somewhere within that dream, somewhere beneath the weight of years, she smiled. Small, soft, real. The night stretched on the stars high above. The house silent, except for the occasional sigh of the wind, and through it all, she slept, carried by memory, by kindness, by the quiet truth of survival hours. Passed unnoticed, the world outside moved forward. But within the house, within her heart, a stillness remained. First soft glow of dawn began to press at the edges of the dark, a gentle silver light that touched the window panes, that softened the sharp edges of the night, and as the morning stirred, her breath shifted too. The rhythms of sleep loosening, the first traces of waking drawing her slowly upward. Her eyes fluttered open, lashes brushing against the softness of the pillow for a moment. She lay still, the weight of sleep still heavy in her limbs, the warmth of the dream lingering. Her gaze moved to the window, to the faint light growing, to the quiet promise of a new day, and without quite knowing why, she smiled again, that same small, real, unforced smile that had begun to find its way back to her. She shifted beneath the quilt, her hands resting softly against her chest. Her breath moved steady, and the thought rose gentle. Simple, I'm still here. The ache was still there, the memories still lived inside her, but the heaviness of it all no longer crushed her, no longer defined her. Every breath, the morning light deepened, the house stirred, and slowly, without rush, without force, she sat up. Her fingers brushed through her hair, her eyes soft, her body aching but alive, and she let herself sit in the quiet for a few moments longer. The world waited. The day would come, the motions of life would begin again. But this soft, quiet beginning was hers, a breath in, a breath out, and the steady truth of survival beneath it all. Asterisk, the morning unfolded, slowly, a pale wash of gold stretching across the horizon. The softest bird song carried on the breeze, and she sat there on the edge of the bed, her hands resting quietly in her lap, her breath moving steady, her heart lighter than it had felt in years. The room held the hush of early dawn, that fragile space where the world has not yet begun to demand, where time feels slower, softer, and for a long moment she simply let herself be. No rush, no wait, only presence. Her eyes drifted toward the window, the glow of sunrise casting gentle patterns across the floorboards, and for the first time in so long, she felt the beauty of it, felt it without the sharp sting of memory pulling her under. She rose slowly, her body sore but steady, her steps light across the floor as she reached for the worn sweater draped over the back of the chair. The fabric soft, the motion familiar, grounding. She moved toward the kitchen, the house still held the scent of last night's tea, the soft warmth of the old lamp still glowing. Her fingertips brushed the spine of the journal where the boy's napkin rested, and for a heartbeat she paused, her breath catching. Her heart full, she lifted the journal gently, her hands careful as she opened the cover. The napkin unfolded like a quiet treasure, the child's drawing smiling back at her. Simple, pure, and she traced the words once more with the tip of her finger. "Thank you for being brave." The corners of her mouth lifted, soft, real, and she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice barely more than breath, but the weight of it carried through the quiet like a prayer. She closed the journal, set it gently back on the table, and moved to the stove. Kettle filled with fresh water, the click of the burner, the first curl of steam rising into the morning air. Motions soothed her each step, small, ordinary, but sacred in their simplicity. The ache in her bones, the tiredness in her limbs, they no longer felt like burdens. They felt like proof of breath, of living, of coming through. Her eyes drifted to the photograph on the wall again. The desert faces, smiling, the ones she would always carry, the ones who walked with her still in the quiet corners of memory. She pressed her palm lightly to the frame. A silent hello, a silent thank you. Kettle whistled softly, the tea poured.
Away.
The warmth of the mug between her hands, and she stood by the window, sipping slowly, watching the morning stretch. Wider across the sky outside, the wind carried the scent of earth, the soft rustle of leaves. The fragile beauty of a world that continued, that kept moving no matter the weight of the past. She breathed it in her heart, steady her mind clear and for. The first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the road ahead held something more than survival, that maybe it held joy. Softness, belonging. The tea warmed her hands, the sunlight warmed her face, and she stood in the heart of her small home, alive, steady, unbroken. The clock on the wall chimed softly, a new day waiting. She, with quiet strength, stepped forward to meet it. The sun lifted higher, the shadows in the house stretched and softened. She moved through the rooms with quiet purpose, each motion small but certain, the ordinary rituals of morning grounding her. Brushing her fingers across the worn edges of the table, straightening a photograph tilted just slightly on the wall, her breath moved soft, her heart steady, the kettle washed clean. The mug set gently on the rack, her hands worked with practiced ease, but the weight in her chest, the heaviness she had carried for so long, had loosened, had shifted. She reached for the door, the same door she passed through each morning before the world woke fully. Stepping onto the small porch, the air crisp, the sky stretched wide, the breeze lifted strands of her hair as she stood there, her eyes tracing the curve of the distant hills, the soft rise of the sun beyond the tree line. The wind touched her face. The light touched her skin, and for the first time she let her shoulders fall back, let the breath fill her lungs without resistance, without the sharpness of old memories tightening her chest. The boy's voice echoed softly in her mind. Thank you for being brave. The words no longer made her flinch, no longer felt distant or unreachable. They settled into her bones now as truth, as something she could carry without shame. Her hands rested on the porch railing. The wood smoothed beneath her fingertips, and she thought of the faces she carried. The laughter, the voices, the hands she held, the lives she had fought to protect, the moments that had shaped her without ever fully defining her. The road stretched quiet, the wind whispered through the trees. And she closed her eyes, let herself feel it all, the ache, the hope, the fragile, persistent hum of survival. She had learned over time that healing was not a straight path. It was not a clean break. It was not something given, but something earned, something fought for one breath, one step at a time. And today, in this soft gold of morning, in the hush, before the world stirred, she felt it, a new beginning, small, unspoken, but real. She opened her eyes slowly, her gaze steady on the horizon. The birds sang, the breeze moved, and inside her a quiet strength, a deeper breath. Her hands lifted to her heart, her palm resting lightly over the place where the napkin's words still lived. And she smiled soft, true, because she knew without doubt, without fear, that the path ahead, no matter how uncertain, was hers to walk. The weight of the past, the echoes of memory, they would walk with her, but they would not define her, they would not break her. The morning stretched open, the light spilled wider, and she stepped back inside, her heart full, her breath steady. The next breath, the next step, the next moment. All waiting, all hers. The door closed softly behind her as she stepped back into the house. The warmth of the sunlight lingered on her skin. Her breath moved smooth and unhurried, and as she crossed the threshold, something inside her settled, something deep, something that for so long had felt fractured, now felt quietly whole. Her hands brushed along the edge of the table. Her eyes drifted once more to the journal resting there, the napkin safe inside, the boy's words still fresh in her heart. Thank you for being brave, she whispered them again, softly, not as a memory, but as a truth. The house held its familiar scent, soft wood, faint tea, the quiet hum of stillness. But beneath that quiet, a new energy stirred, a quiet readiness, a gentle sense that the past no longer held the reins. She moved through the space slowly, her fingertips trailing across old photographs. Books stacked neatly on shelves, little things, pieces of herself tucked into every corner, and for the first time in years she saw it all without the weight of regret pressing on her chest. Her breath deepened, her spine straightened, and with each step, each glance, each heartbeat, the certainty grew. She had survived not just the war, not just the years of carrying ghosts, but the slow, silent unraveling that can happen when the world forgets, when kindness is rare, when recognition fades. But last night had changed something. The The boy's eyes, the quiet gratitude, the moment when her truth had been seen, without question, without judgment. It had stirred something inside her, she thought, long buried, a flicker, a spark. She stood in front of the small mirror by the door, her reflection soft in the morning light. Her eyes clearer than she remembered, and she let her fingers brush the edge of the glass, meeting her own gaze without looking away. "I'm still here." The words moved through her like breath, unspoken but known. The clock chimed softly in the background. The morning unfolding around her, and she knew the day would bring its own challenges. The diner would fill again with faces. Some familiar, some strangers. The world would ask again for her patience, her kindness, her strength. But this time she would carry something different. Not just the weight of memory, but the lightness of having been seen, of having been thanked, of having been reminded that the quiet battles matter, too. She stepped away from the mirror, her hands brushing lightly across the surface one last time. She reached for her coat, the old fabric soft beneath her fingertips, the rhythm of routine returning. But with a gentler touch, the door opened, the morning air met her once more. She stepped forward, one foot, then the next, the weight of the past still there, but no longer the only story. She carried her heart steady, her breath deep, her steps sure. The road ahead stretched wide. The diner, the faces, the laughter, the stories yet to unfold, and her, the waitress, the warrior, the survivor, walking forward into it all, unbroken, unseen by most, but carrying the quiet strength of someone who had already seen the worst the world could offer and still chose to rise. The morning air kissed her skin as she stepped out onto the porch. The world bathed in soft gold, the road ahead quiet wide. Open, her breath moved, steady, her heart calmed. She walked toward her car, the familiar crunch of gravel beneath her boots. Her hands slid gently into her coat pockets, her fingers brushing the edges of her keys, and deeper still the folded napkin, the small weight of it grounding her, reminding her. She paused at the driver's side door, her eyes lifting to the horizon. The sky painted in hues of soft amber and silver, and for a moment, a long, quiet moment, she stood still, letting the sunlight touch her face, letting the wind move through her hair, letting the simple truth of the moment settle deep into her bones. "I am still here." The words pulsed through her, soft, steady, and she knew in ways she could not have spoken aloud that something had changed, not in the world around her, but in the way she carried it, in the way she carried herself. The past would always live inside her, the faces, the battles, the losses, but so too would this softness, this reminder that kindness can find you, even when you've forgotten how to look for either. Hand tightened slightly around the napkin in her pocket, the boy's words, the drawing, the thank you, all of it tucked safely against her heart. She smiled, soft, true, and slipped into the car. The engine hummed to life beneath her fingers, the warmth of it slowly filling the cabin. The road stretched forward, endless, open. The diner would be waiting. The faces, the noise, the life of it all, and she would meet it steady whole because she had walked through fire and come out the other side, not untouched but unbroken. The wheels rolled over gravel. The horizon pulled her forward, and she carried them with her, all of them, the ones she loved, the ones she lost. The boy who looked at her like she mattered, the strangers who would never know her story but would still meet her kindness. Sun lifted higher, the sky stretched wider, and the woman who had fought, who had bled, who had survived, drove forward into the day, her heart full, her breath deeper, spirit steady, a quiet warrior, a silent survivor, the kind the world rarely notices, but should never forget. And somewhere far behind her, the wind carried whispers of desert sand, of distant battles, of names remembered, of stories that would never fade. But ahead, there was life, there was breath. There was the simple, sacred act of beginning again, and she, with her quiet strength, with her scars, with her steady hands, stepped into it fully, with courage, with grace, with the soft, unbreakable truth of survival.